It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Brew and Bites, a cozy local cafe tucked into a bustling corner of the city. The cafe was a haven of warmth and familiarity, its large windows letting in streams of golden sunlight that danced across the wooden floors. The walls were adorned with vintage posters and shelves lined with books, giving the space a charming, lived-in feel. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of conversation and the occasional clink of cups and saucers. The cafe was neither too crowded nor too empty, with a handful of customers scattered across the room. A young couple sat by the window, their heads close together as they shared a slice of cheesecake. A businessman in a crisp suit typed furiously on his laptop, his coffee cooling beside him. In the corner, an elderly woman knitted quietly, her hands moving with practiced ease. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, but beneath the surface, there was a subtle tension, a quiet unease that only the most observant would notice. At a corner table, Emma, a freelance writer in her late 20s, sat with her laptop, sipping a latte. She was engrossed in her work, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she crafted an article about urban loneliness. But every now and then, she glanced up from her screen, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Emma had a knack for observing people, for catching the small details that others missed. It was a habit she had cultivated over years of writing, and it often gave her stories a depth and authenticity that resonated with her readers. Her gaze lingered on the barista behind the counter, a young man named Alex, with tousled hair and a bored expression. He moved with a careless efficiency, his movements quick but lacking the warmth that usually came with customer service. Emma noticed how he barely made eye contact with the customers, how his smile never quite reached his eyes. There was something off about him, something that made her uneasy, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Her attention shifted as the door chimed softly, signaling the arrival of a new customer. An elderly man stepped inside, his presence immediately drawing Emma's eye. He moved slowly but deliberately, his cane tapping lightly against the tiled floor. He was tall, though age had slightly stooped his frame, and he wore a neatly pressed shirt and a flat cap that gave him an air of quiet dignity. His face was lined with the marks of a long life, but his eyes were bright and kind, radiating a warmth that made Emma smile despite herself. "Good afternoon," the man greeted the room softly, his voice carrying a faint accent that hinted at a life lived across continents. There was a musical quality to his speech, a cadence that suggested he had once called another place home. He approached the counter with a gentle smile, his movements unhurried but purposeful. Alex looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing as he took in the man's appearance. Sure," he muttered, his tone dripping with indifference. He rang up the order without making eye contact, his fingers tapping impatiently on the screen of the cash register. John handed him a $10 bill. "Keep the change," he said kindly, his voice warm and genuine. Alex smirked, pocketing the money. "Wow, big spender," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for John to hear. The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting, and for a moment, the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Emma's fingers froze above her keyboard, her eyes darting between John and Alex. She felt a surge of anger, hot and sudden, but she hesitated, unsure of whether to intervene. John straightened his posture, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the counter for support. Though his body was frail, his presence was anything but. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, met Alex's with a quiet strength that seemed to pierce through the young barista's bravado. "Young man," John said, his voice firm but calm, "I may be old, but I deserve the same respect as anyone else. My money is as good as anyone's, and my accent is a part of who I am. It's not something to be mocked." His words hung in the air, heavy with dignity and a lifetime of experience. For a moment, the cafe seemed to hold its breath, the usual hum of conversation replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Even the hiss of the espresso machine seemed to fade into the background. Alex, however, was unmoved. He rolled his eyes, his lips curling into a sneer. "Whatever, old man," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just take your sandwich and go. You're holding up the line." John's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he reached for the paper bag that Alex had shoved across the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes, a weariness that spoke of years of enduring such treatment. But there was also a flicker of resilience, a refusal to let Alex's words break him. Emma, watching from her corner table, felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. Her fingers clenched around her coffee cup, her mind racing. She had always considered herself a bystander, someone who observed but rarely intervened. But this was different. This was wrong. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the silence, drawing the attention of everyone in the cafe. "Hey," she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. "What's your problem? This man has done nothing to deserve this kind of treatment." Alex turned to her, his expression a mix of annoyance and defiance. "Mind your own business, lady," he snapped, his tone dismissive. Emma didn't back down. She walked over to the counter, her phone in hand, her eyes locked on Alex's. "Oh, it is my business," she said, her voice steady but laced with anger. "I'm recording this, and I'm pretty sure your manager would love to see how you treat customers." Alex's bravado faltered for a moment, his eyes flicking to the phone in her hand. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could say anything, the door to the back office swung open. Sarah, the cafe's manager, stepped out, her face a mask of concern. "What's going on here?" she asked, her eyes darting between Emma, John, and Alex. Emma didn't hesitate. "Your employee here just insulted this gentleman for no reason. He's been nothing but polite, and this is how he's treated." Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment. She turned to Alex, her expression hardening. "Is this true?" Alex shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence evaporating. "I was just joking around," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "No big deal." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Alex, this is completely unacceptable. You're fired. Hand over your apron and leave." Alex's jaw dropped. "You're kidding, right?" "I'm not," Sarah said firmly. "We don't tolerate discrimination or disrespect in this cafe." Alex muttered a curse under his breath, tossed his apron on the counter, and stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him. Sarah turned to John, her face filled with remorse. Her hands fidgeted nervously, betraying her embarrassment and regret. "Sir, I'm so sorry for what happened," she said, her voice sincere. "Your meal is on the house, and I'd like to offer you a gift card as an apology. It's the least we can do to make this right." John shook his head gently, his expression kind but firm. "That's very kind of you, but it's not necessary. I appreciate the gesture, but what I truly hope is that this young man learns from his mistakes. Everyone deserves a chance to grow, even him." Sarah nodded, though her guilt was still evident. "You're very gracious, sir. I'll make sure this kind of behavior isn't tolerated here again. Thank you for your understanding." Emma, who had been standing quietly nearby, stepped forward. Her earlier anger had softened into a quiet determination to ensure John was okay. "Let me walk you home, sir," she offered. "It's the least I can do." John smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's very kind of you, young lady. I'd appreciate the company." As they stepped out of the cafe and into the crisp afternoon air, Emma fell into step beside John. The city buzzed around them, cars honking, pedestrians chatting, the distant hum of construction, but their pace was slow and unhurried. John's cane tapped rhythmically against the sidewalk, a steady beat that seemed to ground him. "So, Mr. John," Emma began, breaking the comfortable silence, "if you don't mind me asking, how long have you lived in the city?" John chuckled softly, a sound that carried both warmth and a hint of nostalgia. "Oh, I've been here for over 50 years now. I came to the US when I was in my 30s, looking for a better life. It wasn't easy at first. I didn't know the language well, and people weren't always kind. But I worked hard, saved every penny, and eventually built a life here." Emma listened intently, her curiosity piqued. "What did you do for work?" "I was a mechanic," John replied, a note of pride in his voice. cars, trucks, anything with an engine. I loved it. It was honest work, and it gave me a sense of purpose. But after my wife passed away, I retired. It's been quiet since then, but I manage. Emma's heart ached at the mention of his wife. I'm so sorry for your loss, she said softly. John nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. Thank you. She was the love of my life. We met shortly after I arrived here, and she made this country feel like home. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever faced. Emma hesitated, then asked, Do you have any family here? Children? Grandchildren? John shook his head. No, it was just the two of us. We never had children, and most of my family stayed behind in the old country, but I've made peace with it. Life has a way of teaching you to appreciate what you have, even if it's not what you expected. As they turned onto a quieter street, lined with brownstone buildings and shaded by tall trees, John paused for a moment, leaning on his cane. People like Alex, he said, his voice thoughtful. They don't realize how much their words can hurt, but I've learned to rise above it. When you've lived as long as I have, you understand that anger and bitterness only weigh you down. Kindness, on the other hand, sets you free. Emma nodded, her admiration for him growing with every word. You're an inspiration, Mr. John. I don't think I could have handled that situation as gracefully as you did. John smiled, his eyes twinkling. Grace comes with practice, my dear, and sometimes it's the hardest thing in the world, but it's worth it. They reached a modest apartment building, its brick facade weathered but well kept. John turned to Emma, his expression grateful. Thank you for walking me home, and for standing up for me back there. Not many people would have done that. Emma shook her head. I just did what was right. But honestly, Mr. John, I think I learned more from you today than you did from me. John chuckled. Well, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that we all have something to teach each other. Thank you for listening to an old man's stories. Emma smiled. Anytime, Mr. John. Take care of yourself. As she watched him slowly make his way into the building, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. John's quiet strength and resilience had left a lasting impression on her, a reminder of the power of kindness and the importance of standing up for what's right that evening. After walking John home and reflecting on the day's events, Emma sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. The video she had taken at the cafe played on the screen, capturing Alex's harsh words and John's quiet dignity. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the post button. She knew that sharing the video would expose Alex's behavior to the world, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. With a deep breath, she typed out a heartfelt caption. Today, I witnessed something that broke my heart. An elderly man, a veteran, being treated with disrespect simply because of his age and accent. But I also saw something beautiful, his quiet strength and the power of standing up for what's right. Let's remember that kindness costs nothing, but its impact is priceless. Hashtag kindness matters, hashtag respect for all. She hit post and leaned back in her chair, unsure of what to expect. Within hours, the video began to spread like wildfire. People shared it across platforms, their outrage and support pouring into the comments section. This breaks my heart. No one should be treated like this. John is a hero. His grace in the face of such disrespect is inspiring. Alex should be ashamed of himself. This is unacceptable. The hashtag kindness matters began trending, with thousands of users sharing their own stories of discrimination and acts of kindness. The video struck a chord, resonating with people from all walks of life. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Brew and Bites to find her phone buzzing nonstop. Emails, messages, and social media notifications flooded in, some expressing support for John, others condemning Alex's behavior, and many demanding accountability. Sarah wasted no time. She called an emergency staff meeting, her voice firm but calm. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, she said, addressing the team. We pride ourselves on being a welcoming space for everyone, and we failed. But this is also an opportunity to do better. She announced new staff training programs focused on inclusivity, respect, and customer service. From now on, she said, Everyone who walks through those doors will be treated with dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. The staff nodded, their expressions a mix of guilt and determination. They knew the incident had tarnished the cafe's reputation, but they were ready to rebuild it. John, unaware of the video's viral spread, returned to the cafe the next day for his usual lunch. As he stepped inside, the atmosphere was different. The staff greeted him warmly, their smiles genuine and their words kind. "Mr. John," Sarah called out, rushing over to him. "We're so glad to see you. How are you?" John smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I'm well, thank you. It's nice to be back." Sarah handed him a gift card, her expression earnest. "This is for you, as a small token of our apology, and I'd like to offer you a permanent discount here. You're always welcome at Brew and Bites." John shook his head gently. "That's very kind of you, but it's not necessary. I'm just glad to see things changing for the better." As he sat down to enjoy his meal, other customers began to approach him, their faces filled with admiration. "You're an inspiration, Mr. John," one woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for standing up for what's right." John nodded humbly, his heart warmed by their words. He had never sought attention or praise, but he couldn't deny that it felt good to be seen and appreciated. The incident transformed Brew and Bites into a symbol of community and kindness. People from all over the city began visiting the cafe, not just for the coffee and pastries, but to be part of something bigger. The walls were soon adorned with notes and drawings from customers, each one sharing messages of hope and solidarity. Sarah took it a step further, organizing monthly community events at the cafe, book clubs, open mic nights, and fundraisers for local charities. The cafe became a hub of connection and compassion, a place where people could come together to celebrate their shared humanity. Local news outlets picked up the story, featuring interviews with John, Emma, and Sarah. The incident became a rallying cry against ageism and discrimination, sparking conversations about the importance of respect and inclusivity. At a press conference, Sarah spoke passionately about the changes they were making at the cafe. "This isn't just about one incident," she said. "It's about creating a culture of kindness, where everyone feels valued and respected." Emma, too, found herself in the spotlight. She was invited to speak at community events and schools, sharing her experience and encouraging others to stand up against injustice. John, though initially hesitant about the attention, embraced his new role as a symbol of resilience and grace. He began visiting the cafe regularly, not just for the food, but for the sense of community it provided. One day, as he sat at his usual table, a young boy approached him, clutching a piece of paper. "Mr. John," the boy said shyly, "I made this for you." John took the paper, his eyes softening as he saw the colorful drawing of a man with a cane, surrounded by hearts and the words, "Be kind." "Thank you, young man," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you know." For John, the attention was both humbling and overwhelming. He had spent most of his life in the background, quietly going about his days without seeking recognition. But now, he found himself at the center of a movement he had never anticipated. One evening, as he sat in his small apartment, flipping through the cards and letters he had received, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. "Maybe this is why I'm still here," he thought to himself, "to remind people that kindness matters." Emma, too, was transformed by the experience. Her decision to stand up for John had not only changed his life, but also her own. She began writing a series of articles about everyday heroes, people who, like John, had made a difference through small acts of kindness. Her work gained national attention, and she was invited to speak at conferences and events. "John taught me that courage isn't about grand gestures," she said during a TED Talk. "It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about seeing the humanity in others and refusing to look away." The incident at the cafe became a turning point for the community. Local businesses implemented training programs on inclusivity and respect, and schools introduced anti-bullying initiatives inspired by John's story. Even Alex, the former barista, reached out to John to apologize. Though John forgave him, He also encouraged Alex to use his experience as a lesson in empathy. "We all make mistakes," John told him. "What matters is what we do after. Use this as a chance to grow and be better."